Welcome back. You're watching NewsX. My name is Vineet. 18 people have been injured after explosive devices went off in central Damascus near the hotel where French President Emmanuel Macron had been staying. State news agency had said that 2 devices had been detected by security forces which exploded as specialized units began the process to defuse them. One device was placed inside a parked vehicle while the other was concealed in a bin. Macron has been in the capital for talks with his Syrian counterpart Ahmed al-Shara at the presidential palace. His officials said he was safe and did not hear the explosions. All right, well, the twin blasts are not an isolated incident and carry deep historical and political weight with them. Let's have a look at the context behind today's blast, their timing and what meaning they could possibly carry. Then, of course, we'll discuss and get some perspective from our guests as well. All right, let's talk about the Damascus explosions. Well, it's a fragile transitional period following the 2024 Bashar al-Assad regime change, which of course was an international headline. It was extremely popular for the kind of succession also that it showed to the world. By that I mean the current president, of course, coming in as the leader of Syria with a lot of question marks. He was a part of the resistance. Some people also, in fact, said that he was not only a part of the resistance, he belonged to an organization which had a questionable past as well. So, Bashar al-Assad was a Syrian doctor and military officer, served as president from 2000 to 2024. In fact, he's been accused of genocide. He's been accused of a lot of war crimes as well. Assad's regime was a highly personalist dictatorship. It turned Syria into a totalitarian police state. In fact, the law and order situation was extremely questionable as well at that point in time. In December 2024, Assad's regime was toppled by a fractured but blended coalition of armed groups who used to fight amongst each other back in the days, but they got together to overthrow Assad. In fact, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Sunni Islamist group, launched major offensive. The Syrian National Army, major coalition of opposition groups, was also a part of that resistance and overthrow. The Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish-led multi-ethnic alliance, was also a part of that resistance that eventually led to the ouster of Assad as well. Throughout the conflict, rebels received varying levels of support from Western and regional powers as well. In fact, there was also a time when the Americans were said to have supported these rebels. Who backed Assad? It was Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, Iraq. Who backed the rebels? Well, it was the US, like I said, Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Kingdom and France as well. And those rebels are in power today, and that's why you have Emmanuel Macron in Damascus as well. Well, the aftermath was that Bashar al-Assad fled Syria. 5 decades of rule ended and he was granted asylum in Russia. Vladimir Putin took him in, and the aftermath, of course, was also that Ahmed al-Shara emerged as their leader. He was a former HTS leader who became the face of the transitional government as well. Even when Donald Trump met Shara, there were, of course, a lot of questions asked. International engagement replaced the isolation. Western powers started re-engaging with Damascus, something that had not been done for decades altogether. And Donald Trump, of course, was pivotal in that outreach as well. Al-Shara plays basketball with US officials ahead of his Washington visit. These are, of course, some of the visuals which went viral on social media. And like I said, the isolation which Syria had undergone soon became a thing of the past. Well, the US began easing sanctions. European countries started reopening diplomatic channels as well. Arab states accelerated normalization. The political transition, the move towards Kurdish integration, was also something which escalated right after this transition took place. In fact, giving Syria, the much sought after economic relief that it had been gunning for since a very, very long time. So, described the fall of Assad regime a historic opportunity. This is what the EU said, and it offered support for transition and economic recovery as well. Syria had been reeling under economic backwardness for decades, and first EU head of state to visit the post-Assad Syria. It was a major milestone that Emmanuel Macron was there. He was in Syria for a diplomatic rehabilitation as well. It's unfortunate that this bomb blast took place, and strong endorsement of al-Shara's government. France is positioning itself in Syria's reconstruction as well. They're looking at this as an opportunity as well, and why not? That's what every country wants to do at this point in time. What was the agenda for this visit by Emmanuel Macron? Of course, the reconstruction and investment, the signing of cooperation agreements, the counter-terrorism cooperation and regional security, and inclusive political transition was also something that Emmanuel Macron was looking at. What the probe has said about these blasts? Well, there were 2 IEDs that were used. Macron not in danger. He never even heard any of these explosions. Of course, they happened outside the security perimeter. No group so far has taken responsibility. ISIS is in focus for these twin blasts. And this is, of course, going to be a worry, because as far as Syria is concerned, there were talks that ISIS does not operate in Syria. They have been completely eliminated. But if these blasts are in any way, a resonance of what the ISIS stood for, well, it's a sign of worry. Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, former diplomat, with us on the program. Mr. Rohan Gunaratne, Middle East expert, also joins us on the program. Major General Sudhakarji, defense and geopolitical expert, with us on the program as well. Ambassador Mukherjee, I'll begin with you, ma'am. Well, Syria has been, a very pivotal case study about a country that was plagued, it was marred by terrorists, and that too terrorist organization, which have been notorious for the kind of things that they did. After Assad was overthrown in 2024, they wanted to leave their checkered past behind, but in all totality, ma'am, the ghosts of the past will have some sort of a tickling here and there before they completely evaporate from Syria. Are we seeing just that, or do you think that there are still elements in Syria which are against this outreach by the Western world?
I think, Vineet, that Syria, like Libya earlier and Iraq earlier, was the victim of great power politics emanating from the First Cold War. And as far as al-Shara is concerned, you were right when you very diplomatically said that he belonged to a questionable organization. It was a very questionable organization. It had a very checkered past. It was surprising that European Union major countries, including France, supported al-Shara, and in fact gave support in a manner in which that finally, and that was interesting because Bashar al-Assad was in the process of finally winning the civil war and getting recognized as the indisputed leader of Syria when he was overthrown, and the Russians gave him exile, which was in contrast to the way the Americans treated the Shah of Iran when he was thrown out. They refused him exile. It was Egypt that gave the dying Shah of Iran a political exile. The Americans refused. So here we have a very interesting situation that Macron, France, which has a pivotal role in the shifting Middle East balance, the Middle East balance has shifted precariously after the ongoing Iran conflict. Macron's visit to Syria, I presume, was intended to showcase that there is a power balance in the Middle East which is faithful to the West, to the European Union, that the European Union, in fact, has control of important power points in the Middle East, which includes one of the most important countries with a long history, culture, and civilization, as long as Iran, and that is Syria. So these IED blasts actually demonstrate that despite the claims that have been made by al-Shara, and most people believed him, that he is in complete control, even though it's a fact that Bashar al-Assad came from a very powerful minority group within Syria, which is out of power now. Those people are highly educated, they are weaponized, and they are capable of restarting a civil war in Syria if should they do so. But so far they have played ball because al-Sharaa too has been able to maintain some kind of military and political control and also some developmental assistance because all Syrians, regardless of where they came from, were very tired of such a long civil war. So the IED explosions, in my perspective, beneath demonstrate that there is still some turmoil within, which will manifest itself. The fact that it manifested itself when a person as important as Emmanuel Macron is in the presidential palace or in his hotel, I think he was in the presidential palace when it happened, demonstrates that that kind of absolute control is not there. It must have given the French security who were with Macron some anxious moments, but he's decided to go through with the visit because the stakes are very high. It's very important to reiterate for you that never mind where Donald Trump goes on or returns, they are actually the European Union and European powers are the real power brokers of the Middle East. That is what I think was the main uh, desire of Macron to show that whatever Trump says or does, EU and European powers are the real power brokers in the Middle East. And they're also the ex-colonial powers. Let's not forget that. United States, 250-year-old young United States, is not a colonial power. All these guys are colonial powers, and they know how to play ex-colonial politics. Beneath.
You're quite right, ma'am. I have a question for you in mind, but I'll pick that up when I come back to you. General Sudhakarji, do you think that considering how Syria operates and the kind of past that they have had, it's been an uncontrollable legacy for most leaders. Assad managed to do it for over a couple of decades, but we all know that he used an iron hand to suppress any kind of a revolt. Do you think this integration that the world is trying to have with Syria, looking at it as this newly freed company, is actually a possibility, considering that there is a certain pathology attached to Syria? Sir?
Good evening. Good evening. I hope I'm audible, Vinit.
You are, sir.
And thank
You
you
are.
very much for inviting me for your show, and my very deep regards and warm greetings to distinguished and esteemed co-panelists. Firstly, before I answer your question, let me very briefly touch upon some important salient aspects. Syria has to be understood much more than the historical importance is the geography. Long back, I remember having read a book by Henry Kissinger. He said, no conflict in Middle East can start without Egypt. No peace can be achieved without Syria. That used to be the one-liner of Henry Kissinger long back, and he continued to, it remains as a one-liner even today in America and the Western Hemisphere. So while saying that, one has to understand that the location of Syria is so strategically positioned, it is so cut out naturally, that it has got more than one issue which is threatening its existence. And one of the important issue is that this country, this land is gifted with a lot of minerals, and more than the mineral are the oil. And the oil is something very sweet. It is comparable with the best oils in the world. That is what America is looking for. Second point, while I endorse what Ambassador Ma'am has articulated, in my opinion, I feel that there is a huge global competition or strategic rivalry taking place in Syria. Let's be mindful of the fact Bashar al-Assad, he ruled Syria for 20 odd years, and around 2015, that was the time when Russia came in, and prior to him, his father was ruling Syria. It's almost for a good about half a century. He and his family were ruling Syria despite the despotic or the autocratic rule. They ruled Syria for whatever reason, and they were actually driven by, I would say in my opinion, by a non-democratic force and more leaning towards the communism. So therefore, the America, which at the moment is trying to legitimize the non-state actors and bring them up to the mainstream ecosystem of global governance or the regional governance, is basically trying to change the contours of Middle East one by one. While they may be resorting to legitimization of non-state actor, but they are also quite aware of the fact that this is going against the friction of the terrain. And but this is the new normal. Talk about Syria, talk about Afghanistan, and before you and me realize, Iran may also be, maybe gravitating towards a realization of similar status, even including the proxies. While these may sound very outlandish, but the fact remains, the question which you asked, I must compliment you for framing the question so beautifully. The fact is that will it last? That is the moot question. Even if it tries, will it last? That time will tell. I can't actually predict accurately. But one thing I would like to highlight in my articulation is that yes, there is a drive towards democracy, liberalized kind of a rules of engagement in the world order. But is America following the rules of engagement? No. So they're basically looking for sources which will provide them a consistent and steady flow of wealth, whether it is oil or rare earth element or the selling of the defense produced items, that is the defense items to the market, international market, or the pharmaceutical industry, likewise. So their basic aim is not the stability of the region. Their basic aim is the resources they're looking for, which will provide them a kind of a consistent, predictable, steady flow of wealth, so that the debt which is mounting by every day, it's $39 trillion. Next year, by this time, it will be 41 trillion. It is becoming hugely unmanageable. They're able to address that issue. But the point that I wish to make is more important than America's indulgence is actually the Russia has lost its dominance in the area. Russia will, in all possible ways, will try to get back to the space that it has lost in the recent past. After Assad has been ousted, it would like to have some kind of a ports as it was obtaining earlier in the past before he was ousted, thrown out by the present government. And Russia also would like to get back to its primacy or preeminence of its dominance in the region, because that cannot be discounted, be it the Black Sea or coming into the Mediterranean and along the coast of Syria. Russia would like to have its dominance so that it can continue to extend its sphere of influence right across Mediterranean to the northwest Africa as also the Central Africa. Back to you, Vinit.
Fabulous points there, sir. We have some breaking news coming in. Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara warned those involved in the attack, saying they will be arrested as soon as possible. He also added, and I quote, "I salute President Macron's courage in continuing the visit as well." All right, Mr. Gunaratne, a lot's been said about Syria at this point in time. Is it an easy country that the world can assimilate with? Or do you think, considering the fact that there have been so many challenges related to security, terrorism, religion, all of these could perhaps be an impediment to the world, literally embracing Syria?
Terrorism remains the single biggest challenge for Syria for two reasons. One is that since December 2024, when Ahmad al-Shara captured power in Damascus, we have seen a number of attacks. The biggest attack was in July of 2025, when the Greek Orthodox Church in Damascus was attacked, killing 30 people. And then we saw this month, that is July 2nd, we saw 9 people killed in a Damascus cafe. And of course, the French President visit, this attack took place. I have no doubt that this is the ISIS, because we saw that in February of this year, after ISIS broke out of prison in January of this year, they have moved a very large number of prisoners outside the Kurdish area, and they have moved to different locations. So ISIS, in fact, is reviving. About 6,000 ISIS members were moved by the Americans to facilities in Iraq. But certainly Ahmad al-Shara will have to deal with this ISIS threat. Second is that Ahmad al-Shara himself is an Islamist. He is previously from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is an al-Qaeda affiliate group. Of course, he turned against ISIS because before he formed Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, he was the ISIS representative in Syria. He has now embraced relationships with the West. He wants to work with the Americans, he wants to work with the Canadians, with the Europeans, and I believe that the visit of Macron is a turning point. But once again, the security situation in Syria will remain a challenge unless security and stability is restored. Syria cannot be a prosperous nation because prosperity very much depends on social harmony and on national security.
Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, well, is there a significance to Macron also visiting Syria? Currently he also has found himself facing a lot of backlash for the kind of immigrant policies that the French have adopted. Is that somehow tied to perhaps making Macron's political stock a little more volatile, if you catch my drift, ma'am?
Yes, well, Vineet, the issue here is that Macron in some ways has lost some credibility, some political importance. He's been criticized for the way he's dealt with Trump. They thought that he should be much more assertive as President of France, when initially the entire EU actually caved in along with the NATO Secretary General. So this visit to Syria, in my opinion, was also intended to give a strong signal that France has traditional areas of influence in the Middle East and in Africa. Those areas of influence have started waning. For example, what's happening in Mali, etc., in Francophone Africa. Their earlier very cozy relationship with Senegal has declined over the years. But in the Middle East, as far as Syria is concerned, they used to have earlier a working relationship with Bashar al-Assad's father. But somehow over the years, because of great power politics and the rivalries emanating from the Cold War, First Cold War 1.0, there was this whole business of the West trying to bring down the Assad regime. In the process, they destroyed Syrian heritage, culture, Syria's development, the fact that despite the dictatorship, women had equal rights under the Assad regime. Syria was developing. You had even Syrian women in the armed forces. So there is no doubt that the kind of development they were bringing to Syria was completely different from what an Islamist would bring. Now you have here a very interesting situation, as my co-panelist pointed out, that you have a person who represented the ISIS, who's turned his back on them, but he has a very troubled past, and there are people who want to take revenge. So the issue here also is, beneath, how long will al-Shara last? Because if there are people who have enough clout to let off 2 IEDs just a short distance away from where Macron is staying,
correct,
it's
ma'am,
also signal to him, be careful. We couldn't get Macron, but we can certainly get you because you live here. So it shows that his actual hold, political military hold on Syria, is not exactly what the world thought it was, you thought it was. It's much more tenuous than that. So as they say, when you live by the sword, you die by the sword. I'm sure he must be thinking
You're
the
quite right
same.
about that, ma'am. We have some breaking news coming in. Addressing a news conference following the blast, President Macron stated, and I quote, "We are not naive about the risks, but they are being managed. Certain groups sought to prevent Syria's full and complete reintegration into the international community. France is working to redefine its security and military cooperation with Syria, including the potential support of French special forces to fight Islamic State, which has claimed several attacks on Syrian forces this year as well." Right, General Sudhakarji, ISIS keeps coming up. You know, there was a time briefly in the middle as well where ISIS was completely removed, from the international psyche. Do you think that there is some sort of a comeback also being hinted here because of these attacks?
Absolutely. We need to understand, although this question should have been pointedly asked to Professor Guru Ratna because he is an authority. But I have visited the place, I have studied the subject myself. To whatever best I can actually join the dots, there is a revival of ISIS, in my opinion, although we claim that in 2017 the backbone of ISIS had been decimated and it had been destroyed. I'm talking about the caliphate across Syria and Iraq, distance of 267 kilometers. Consequent to that claim, I feel, although the small splinter groups have actually spread, one group has gone towards Northwest Africa and now they're playing merry hell towards Sahel region, which is cutting across the Central Africa to the northeast to the Horn of Africa. The other one is Levante area that we talk of, with this Israel, Mediterranean coast, Syria, this happens to be the Levante area. The third is the most dangerous one, which is the ISKP, the Khorasan, that is Central Asia, and you have Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the South Asia. Lately, I've been reading lots of articles, international journals and all, that although they have not been successful post 2019, but there is an all-out effort of ISIS in extending the caliphate right across Southeast Asia to Australia. And what happened in Australia a couple of months back is a manifestation of what I am saying. So therefore, definitely to answer your question, there is a revival of ISIS in multiple forms. But if you allow me, Vineet, I wish to make a very important point that is flitting through my mind. We need to understand this bomb blast from the perspective of telling the ruling dispensation that all is not good under you. There is no stability. And also giving a message to Macron, because he has his hands full in the domestic constituency. He's looking out for avenues which will give him kudos. And he's come here. He is the first president of European Union, the oldest, one of the oldest countries as a member of European Union, visiting Syria. Also, it is a founding member of NATO. That has to be understood. So there is some kind of a convergence, platform of convergence, congruence between what he is doing, and at some point in time, there was convergence between Donald Trump and him with regard to Syria. And like ma'am has said very rightly,
All right,
whatever
sir.
things happening in Syria, it
We
is kind of
we
the trigger
unfortunately
was
have
given
run
by
out of
him.
time, sir. We have run out of time. I appreciate your thoughts as always.